Today's storybook is on a story called Fish Hotel. It was written by Lynn Markham and illustrated by Justin Saporsky. For as long as she could remember, Tessa had loved fish. When she went canoeing with her family, she spent the whole time leaning over the edge of the canoe, watching the fish. During the second week of summer vacation, Tessa and her family went to their shared family cottage on Lake Catherine. She was so excited to spend a whole week playing with her cousin Hugo and watching fish at the lake. Hugo had promised to teach her how to snorkel, and she had been practicing in the bathtub at home. It was dark when they arrived at the cottage. Uncle Henry greeted them and helped them with their bags. Tessa shared an upstairs bedroom with Hugo, who had arrived with his parents a couple of days earlier. The two cousins stayed up late that night, whispering excitedly about all of their plans. The next morning, Tessa and Hugo woke up early and ran down to the lake together. Hugo helped Tessa put on her mask. The two of them sank down into the water, grinning at each other. "Whoa, it's a completely new world underwater," said Tessa. "Yeah, there are so many new things to see," replied Hugo. They both laughed at the funny sound of their voices coming up through their snorkels. "Where are the fish?" Tessa asked. "Fish don't hang out at this beach much," answered Hugo, "but they love the trees and plants in the water. See those poplar trees? Uncle Henry told us they fell in the lake this spring. Let's swim over there." When Tessa reached the trees, the underwater world changed before her eyes. The open sandy area she had just crossed was like a desert, but the poplar trees were different. After a few seconds, a variety of fish swam out from behind the leaf-covered branches, including a group of crappies. They had shimmery scales, and she noticed that their speckles helped them blend in with the trees. They swam together and all turned at the same time like dancers. "Wow, they are so beautiful," Tessa exclaimed. Then Tessa saw some minnows she hadn't noticed before because they blended in with the leaves. One minnow grabbed an insect off a leaf and munched it down. Lunch, thanks to the tree. Tessa pointed and Hugo nodded, smiling. Suddenly, the minnows darted behind the leaves. Tessa looked behind her and saw a largemouth bass swimming toward her. The bass stopped and stared at Tessa for a few long seconds, as if he wanted to tell her something. Then he slowly turned and swam away. "Wow, did you see that largemouth bass?" asked Tessa. "It was huge. And did you see those minnows swim away from it?" asked Hugo. "Yeah, the minnows and the little fish really need that tree for safety, so the big fish can't eat them for lunch," exclaimed Tessa. "I know," said Hugo. "That tree is their home, a safe place for them." "Are there enough trees in the lake so all the little fish can find shelter?" asked Tessa. "I don't know," said Hugo. "Let's see how many trees we can find in other parts of the lake." As they climbed out of the water, Tessa noticed a spot along the shoreline where there was a slit in the ground where she could see right down to the tree roots. Tessa and Hugo peered down into the silt and saw the lake bottom, which was covered with roots, leaves, and small rocks. "Hey, look at that red eye," said Hugo. Tessa looked closer and saw an olive-brown fish lurking among the roots. All of a sudden, a brilliantly colored fish flashed through the slit and then disappeared into a nearby bed of water plants. On their quest to find out if there were enough trees in the lake for all of the fish, Tessa and Hugo snorkeled over a cluster of trees that included a gigantic white pine tree. The white pine looked very different than the fallen poplar trees they had snorkeled by earlier. Most of its needles and small branches were gone. They were standing in shallow water when they noticed a woman waiting on the other side of the trees. Hugo waved. The woman, with a twinkle in her eye, said, "Hi, kids. Are you checking out our trees?" "Hi, Carol. This is my cousin Tessa. Yes, we're looking for fish." "Welcome, Tessa. Well, you kids have come to the right place. The fish love these trees. Do you know the story of this white pine? Hugo and Tessa shook their heads. This tree grew taller than a 10-story building. My dad climbed it as a kid each summer to peek into the eagle's nest near the top to see if there were any chicks and to get an awesome view of the lake. 10 years ago, a big windstorm blew so hard that the tree crashed down into the lake. It was over 200 years old. When this majestic tree fell, we heard a giant whomp and felt the cottage shake. Tessa looked down at the trunk of the tree, as wide as a refrigerator, and tried to imagine that noise. After being a home to eagles, squirrels, woodpeckers, and other animals for over 200 years standing up, it started a second life in the lake. My dad told me that there used to be a lot more trees in the lake, and the fishing was much better then. So I left this tree in the water to become an underwater home for fish, a fish hotel. Tessa and Hugo smiled, imagining an underwater hotel with guest rooms and a restaurant. But what happened to all of its needles? Tessa asked. In the first few years the tree was in the lake, the needles and twigs fell to the bottom of the lake, where the water insects shredded them into tiny pieces. Then fungi and bacteria digested the tiny pieces and released nutrients, which fed the algae growing on the tree. See how mossy it looks? Water insects and their larvae eat the bacteria and algae, and bluegills come to eat the insects on the tree. Then predators like great blue herons, largemouth bass, and muskies come to feed on the bluegills. That really does sound like a hotel restaurant with a large buffet, Tessa said, delighted. Yeah, that's one that's open 24 hours a day, Hugo added. The kids went back underwater, and a bluegill swam down from the surface. All of a sudden, something big came speeding after it. The bluegill darted under the tree trunk just in time. Both of the kids popped up. "It's a loon!" cried Hugo. Yes, they eat fish too. Loons live on lakes with lots of fish and clear water so that they can see the fish they eat for lunch, explained Carol. Tessa looked around and noticed other trees nearby. Did all of these trees fall into the lake too, she asked. Many did. When you have lots of trees growing along the shoreline, some fall in the water every few years and become new fish hotels. Last year, a friend of mine who studies fish helped me make a bigger fish hotel by adding a few more trees in the water. He cut the trees in the winter from that hill by the road and then laid them on top of the ice. When the ice melted, they sank right where we wanted them. The group of trees we have in the water now are home to many animals. It also protects my shoreline from waves so it doesn't get washed into the lake. But the best part is that now some of my neighbors are also leaving their fallen trees in the lake. The dinner bell rang. While eating, Hugo and Tessa told Uncle Henry all about the different fish they'd seen during their snorkeling adventure. And when they were done, the three of them walked down to the lake together. Uncle Henry said, "This afternoon I'm going to clean up the yard and chop up that poplar tree that fell in the water over there." "No!" the kids cried. "Uncle Henry, the little fish need that tree," Tessa explained. "It's their home. It keeps them safe from the big fish. This morning we watched them, and the largemouth bass would have eaten the little fish for sure if they didn't have that tree to hide in." "Lots of other animals find homes in trees in the lake too," added Hugo. "But that tree will get in the way of boaters," said Uncle Henry. While Hugo, Tessa, and Uncle Henry were looking at the poplar tree and deciding what to do, they noticed a fisherman stop at the poplar tree to try his luck. Hugo pointed down the shoreline and said, "Uncle Henry, our neighbor Carol left the fallen trees on her shoreline to be a fish hotel. See it right there?" After a long pause, Uncle Henry said, "Well, okay, I'll leave the tree in the water then. People seem to like fishing there, and I guess the neighbors don't mind. I never thought about how leaving trees in the water helped fish, and I do want fish in our lake. We could plant some trees near the water so there will be big underwater hotels for lots of animals to use when we're grown up," asked Tessa. Uncle Henry smiled and tousled her hair. "Sure," he said. The end. Hi, so hopefully you enjoyed the story of the Fish Hotel. It's really important to understand what we are looking for good habitat for fish in our local lakes and rivers. Now, if you imagine you're going to go down to the lake and go swimming, you might be looking for something like this. You like nice clear water, a nice sandy bottom. You don't want to touch too many weeds or stub your toe on sticks or rocks. So to us, this looks like a nice, good, healthy lake. However, for fish, there are different needs that they have, and they need to make sure that they are safe. They need some safety. They need a food source. So they're going to look for something different in their lake habitat. As we learned in the story, trees that fall into the river or the lake, this provides some really great habitat for our native fish. It creates a great fish hotel, a nice safe space for them to live. So within the water of that fish hotel, you're going to see some branches that poke down into the water. Sometimes you'll see some tree roots or tree stumps, all providing great habitat for those native fish. Now remember those weeds we talked about. Nobody likes touching the icky weeds when you're out swimming. Feels kind of gross. But the weeds provide a great, great service for those fish. So not only is it providing some shelter for them, but it also can actually provide a food source because lots of smaller fish hang out in those weeds. Maybe some insects are in there as well. So the weeds are a great thing to have in that fish habitat. Now, some of our lakes and rivers might not have a lot of the fallen trees or logs or weeds in there, but people can actually help create fish habitat as well. So this is something that is commonly found in the water. This is called a fish crib. So it looks almost like kind of a Lincoln log style log cabin, just some logs that are stacked on top of each other, and it's sunk down into the river. Sometimes they fill it with some rock or other things as well, and it creates some nice fish habitat. So there are all sorts of different ways to provide good habitat to our fish, and when you have good habitat, we have good diversity, lots of variety of different fish. Next time you go down fishing, maybe you'll be a little bit more successful. So next time you head out to a lake or river this summer just to enjoy a nice day out in nature, take a look at the water. Look around the shoreline. Do you see lots of vegetation? Do you see fallen trees or logs or stumps in the water? That's a sign of something good going on. If you see grass going right up to the waterfront and it's just kind of a bare bottom, that's something that we like to improve on to make sure that we have enough habitat out there to support all of our aquatic organisms. All right, thank you so much for joining us again, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.